A lot of people say we need more education on climate change, and I fundamentally don't agree.
Welcome to the Tales to Inspire podcast. Before we get started on this episode, I would like to invite you to our community so that you can hear more stories to inspire change within your life and positive change within the systems in which we live. All I want you to do is to click on the subscribe button. Your comments mean the world to us with anything that's resonated with you, and I absolutely love your support. I can't wait to go on this journey alongside you. Thank you so much for subscribing. Let's get into today's episode. I would like to say a huge thank you to today's sponsors, the Better Business Network. Now, we have been part of the Better Business Network since its founding in 2020, and we absolutely love being a member and what that provides. The network is an inclusive nationwide community for purpose-driven businesses, for those who care about their social and environmental impact and want to do something to support the world in which we live. They help you grow your impact, income, and audience while advocating for systemic change. They give you access to events, tools, resources, and training to upskill your organization to ensure that you don't leave any gaps towards the world that you want to live. They provide events, tools, resources, and training to upskill your organization towards supporting you on your journey towards being a better business. To find out more about the network, head over to thebetterbusiness.network online. Today, our bite-sized episode is with Adam Bastock.
I'm Adam Bastock, and this is my tale to inspire.
Adam, please can you tell us what sustainability means to you?
Yeah, so I think sustainability is one of those key words that gets used quite a lot, but for me it really is about, we typically work with small businesses, so it's how do we get sustainability into each part of the business, and that might be ethical and sort of environmental, but for me it's also got to be financial. It's about how does your business operate in a way that means that you're going to exist in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and kind of the pressures that you might be facing in the next 6 months as well. How do we alleviate that very quickly with sustainability actions? So I think that's where sustainability is such a big phrase. You can go in any direction with it. I could spend ages talking about financial sustainability and the importance of attracting new customers and marketing and how you tell your message there, or it might be equally something like B Corp and already into kind of buzzword bingo. Things like B Corp or different like systems like that, where you go, actually, how do we make sure that our product is ethical and social and is aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, whatever it is. So this isn't really answering the question, because I think it's so big. So that's why I think for me sustainability is how do we make sure that a small business is going to exist and be profitable and successful in the next 12 months through sustainability. For me, that is mostly through things like carbon reduction, because of the benefits that will bring and the need for that at a kind of global scale over the next 5-10 years.
So you kind of explained on a small scale there how big sustainability is, and there's certain parts where it's so big that an ordinary person walking down on a street, you say the word sustainability and it switches them off, right? They just completely cut off to that. How do we stop that from happening?
Yeah, I think this is when, but for me, the answer is marketing, because we need to tell a better story, and that story needs to be better so that people buy into it and they understand what it means. An example of that would be something like plastic free. There was a report that came out in The Guardian about 2 months ago, where 53% of people, or something like that, couldn't define what single-use plastics were. So we take that in the sustainability world as an assumption that people know what that is and that it's very obvious and that it's a really bad thing and we need to move away from it. However, we're in a position where 50% potentially, and it's quite a small study obviously, of the UK do not know what that actually means, or more importantly, the benefits of it not being single-use plastic. And I think that's where, if we want to scale the adoption of sustainability to a point where it has positive impacts and is a better world, we need to sell those benefits far better than we are doing at the minute. We've known about climate change for 30 years, is kind of the if I'm being generous. There are studies going back about 150, 200 years on this, that people knew the impacts of burning coal, putting CO2 into the atmosphere and the impacts of that. Yet we're still at a point where greenhouse gas emissions are increasing year on year. Happy to define any of these terms as well, because I realise I am going off on one. But each year that has gone up. So the movement, if you want to call it that, the sustainability industry has fundamentally failed at moving hearts and minds to a point where we're taking action on that in a kind of mass, ambitious level. Yes, governments have a role to play, yes, corporates have a role to play, but ultimately I think if we can get the story right, and that is at a very small level of if you've got a small business who's selling wine or something like that, and going, well actually, this wine is great because it's sustainable. We're not at that point in the minute, we're talking about wine in a way that might be, or whatever the product is, in going, this product is sustainable. And it's like, well, who cares? Like, what does that mean to my actual daily life? And there's a big issue here around the broader marketing or selling or sales messages of, if we're looking purely at carbon emissions as sustainability, well, don't fly, don't eat meat, don't drive a car, don't go on holiday, don't have fun. It's a very negative loop, which is why people push back against it and go, well, actually, I'm not that interested now. And I think you need to flip those to go, well, actually, it's about taking longer holidays that happen to be by train, or it's taking, getting your employer to give you more holiday pay and more budget to then go on those longer holidays that are low carbon or whatever it might be, and having fun with it and making it interesting and selling the benefits to the individual kind of user or customer and their daily life, rather than it being this big sort of social thing.
Because that message, essentially what you're saying is it needs to be simpler.
Yeah.
And it needs to be more direct and more visible to say, this is the benefit it gives to you and this is why. And and I don't think we're there right now.
Miles away. And I think direct is the key word, and it's a frustration of mine that I have within the sustainability movement, where a lot of people say we need more education on climate change. And I fundamentally don't agree, because I think education is slow, and how many people actually want to go and sit in a classroom and spend more time learning about something that is quite negative. We don't get educated on a Range Rover or a Lamborghini. People want Range Rovers and Lamborghinis because they're gaining a status of owning or being seen with that brand or whatever it is. Therefore, we need to that's inspirational, and people want that, right or wrong. They are unsustainable cars and they're bad in that sense, but yet people want them, and more people want that than they do sort of eco-action potentially. So how do we flip that round and go, well, actually, here's the sort of status gain, here's the inspiration for you to live a better life that happens to be sustainable as well, and sell that dream and sell that kind of gain? Because I think at the minute we're miles off in terms of it's not direct. We're not directly linking the benefits of that action to people's lives.
And what you're talking about there is culture change. It's actually changing cultures.
Yeah.
So that actually the way that we think, the way that we are, change. Now, that sounds deep and that sounds really, really big. However, COVID changed the way our culture changed like that.
Yeah.
And it can happen. People say, oh, you can't change cultures like that, but you can if there's a big enough meaning behind it and a powerful enough message. So I think it is definitely possible. But what about the scaremongering or the doom? Everything, the world's going to end, this is going to happen, this is what you need to do, the polar caps and everything's melting, the seas are going to rise and the coastal towns are not going to be anymore. That's another way that just switches the regular everyday person off. Is there a better way to go about this?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. Because I think fear is not a motivator. So from a marketing point of view, putting that sort of, selling that message, you would remove that and just go, look, this is how it's going to impact your life. These are the benefits to your life as a result of that. That's my gut reaction to that question. However, there is a concern there that then it's actually really important, and we do need to have awareness of the alarm and the scale of the issue we are facing and the rapidity of that hitting. And I don't think people really know what it means. Again, it's that direct relation to their daily lives, in that what does 1.5 degrees or 3 degrees look like in your personal life? I think if people realise that, they would be terrified and they would act quickly in a way that with COVID they made dramatic reductions to their lives to protect their daily safety. Yes, the state has a role to play in that. Yes, everyone has a role to play in that. It's not just on the individual, so that's a really key message to get across as well. Yeah. But ultimately it is a system, and those individuals influence the systems as well, the policy, the state actors, whatever it is. Again, going very deep, and it's not a lecture, don't worry guys. But I think it is that challenge of how do we walk the line between educating people on the severity of the problem of climate change and selling them the idea of action in an inspirational way that means they want to do it. And I don't think we're there yet, because we're still at the point of going, well, actually, you should feel bad because you're flying every now and then. The reality is you're probably flying because it's 10 times cheaper than getting the train. Yeah. So how do we handle that messaging? And I don't have an answer to it really.
And part of that then, in January, we both attended the Better Business Summit. So Hannah Cox, one of our amazing ambassadors, she leads on that. And essentially, one of the topics was it's not an environmental fight, it's an economic one.
Yeah.
Because if I can't feed my kids, and if I can't, if I can't, whatever, essentially, have enough money to survive, how can I expect to do these kind of things, to think about my carbon footprint, to think about, I'm not even thinking about going on holiday, what are you on about, like, holidays aren't, so on this side of it, where do you feel in terms of that front, but also, where does the responsibility lie for sustainability and where we move forward?
That's a very, very good, very big questions. I'll tackle the first one because I think it's slightly easier. I think sustainability has got a big issue around, and I noticed this at a conference a couple of weeks ago, is incredibly white, is incredibly middle class, and I'm aware that I'm not exactly the kind of the solution to that, but it was just that moment of looking around and being like, this is a bubble, this is a small bubble of people in that wider economic space, and I think there is a lack of diversity there, which is why we're not seeing the change that we need, because we're not engaging everybody we need to on that, to a point. If you say, if you've got a single mum, she is going to, who's like struggling to feed her kids, that is the number one priority for her. And what we're not doing is giving her the solutions and the tools in a way that means that she can both reduce her emissions and feed her kids, or be sustainability in however we or she defines that. I think that's the biggest gap at the minute. And part of the reason for that is that personal responsibility is perhaps being overbearing at the minute, where even now I'm talking about putting the onus on her to act. The question really is also then, how does the local government, how does the national government, etc., or the companies that she's buying from help her in that? That is then, I think, to go into the second question of who's responsible for it, and I think this is where it has to be everybody. And the challenge I've got to a lot of people who say, well, whose responsibility is it? And go, well, it's actually corporates that need to be doing this. It's like, yes, but who works in corporates? People. There is like no man is an island type thing. People who are in corporate offices making decisions are people who should be worried about and interested in and inspired by sustainability, because that will then in fact impact their work. Same with politicians, and that they should be doing more. Ultimately, if they thought they were going to win votes and gain power by doing stuff that is ambitious on sustainability, they would be doing it. And I think this is why everything to a certain extent is marketing in my mind, of that people have got pains and wants and needs, and we just need to address those accordingly. And so yeah, I think it is everyone's responsibility. Governments need to do more, but I think private sector is actually leading the way in some ways, in some of the legislation and some of the legislation is the wrong word, but some of the pressures they're putting on there, like supply chains, for example, is really ambitious. Okay. And things are happening faster behind the scenes than people might realise. However, that needs to be supported with clear direction at a political level, which we have not had for arguably the past 10, 15 years. So there is, at least in the UK, I think the EU is slightly different. They are doing bigger guns on that. So yeah, but I don't think, there's a stat that came out recently. There was another Guardian article where it was 56 companies are responsible for 80% of all emissions, which is a big number, and there's several ways you can cut that up, and there's several ways you can interpret that and then react to it. Is either, I am powerless, I can do nothing, I am nothing, I am not one of these 56 companies, therefore, happy days, it's not my responsibility. Ring up EasyJet and jump on a flight and do as many trips as you can before it all disappears, which is what some of my friends and people that I know are doing. The challenge there is, in that report, it requires a level of understanding of where those figures have come from, in that the reason 56 companies are responsible for 80% of the emissions is because, guess what, they're making stuff that we're using and we're buying, and that every time we buy a flight, that's creating a demand for fuel, which they're then producing, which is where those figures are coming from. And therefore, there is that case of systems change is achieved through individual kind of consumer influence as well as government impacts and everything else. So I don't think it's enough just to shirk responsibility and go, do you know what, I'm a small person, therefore I can't do anything. I think we do need to be aware that everyone has some control over what their decisions do and the impact they have, as well as the influence they have as individuals on their workplace and on their peers. And I've seen this even within my own sort of friend group over the past few years. as I've moved into sustainability. They've gone on their own journeys and they've kind of come with me a little bit on that from seeing what I've done. So don't underestimate the power of that sort of influential piece.
And it's so connected. Like, you look at from the individual, but they work in these places and they live within these communities and these governments so everyone's connected to everyone in some way. And I think having the responsibility is definitely right in terms of everyone has some kind of responsibility to take part in. So
I think, so we do a lot of workshops with small business owners to teach them on this and go, right, what's your responsibility in terms of, how do you measure your carbon footprint? Okay. And that is things that you can control and things that you influence, essentially. So it's things like your electricity bills and your gas bills and the things that you're directly buying, the petrol you're putting in the diesel van to deliver pianos to Aberdeen or whatever it is. But it's also the supply chain, and it's the things that your business is buying and selling, and therefore, and this is a very specific example, but if you are buying something from like toilet roll or paper or something like that from forests in Finland, tracking that from Finland through to your warehouse in the UK and then that going off to your customers somewhere in the UK, technically from a carbon footprint language point of view, that is all part of your carbon footprint that you need to be aware of and take responsibility for. And I think this is where the fear comes in, because that responsibility, which we've just been discussing, is what is paralysing. Is suddenly people are going from a place of, this is just electricity mostly, and maybe my the petrol car that I've got, but I'll buy an EV in a few years, to, oh my God, everything that I'm doing as a business owner has a carbon footprint and is driving things. I'm overwhelmed by that. I can't control all those things. I can't possibly reduce those emissions down. What do I do? And then the questions we normally get are actually not in bad faith. They are ones that are, those people are just overwhelmed by what they're experiencing and going, I didn't realise that this is so big. And so that's where the challenge comes in for us, is navigating them on that to go, well, don't worry about that just yet. We'll come to that later. But yes, ultimately, everything that you do as a business is part of your responsibility, is part of your carbon footprint. Because whether you're buying, low carbon trees from Finland, or whether you're buying, virgin Amazonian forest toilet paper, that is a thing that you have control over in that decision process. So that's where I think the challenge really lies, is in managing that overwhelm.
I think on that front then is visibility. For me as a business owner, or me as a consumer who's a regular everyday person, is I don't know that my toilet rolls come from Finland, from that wood or that forest or wherever it's come from. Is how do we gain that visibility as much as possible? And I guess, even if you look at food, if you look at meat, try and find out the farm that you made your meat has come from. It's really hard to find that out, and that's really difficult. I definitely want to know, and I see more companies doing it, like putting a little QR code on and saying where you can find out where your coffee beans have come from. Yeah. But it's few and far between compared to what's out there.
And this is where legislation comes in, and this is where the government is sort of needed to mandate on this. There's a really interesting thing a few years ago, talking of sort of meat, where I think it was Tesco's tried carbon labelling in like 2005. It was quite early in this. It might not have been them, so don't quote me on that. But they basically started tested out carbon labelling menus, or their sort of their meat counter or whatever it was. The thing that they found is that the sales of the products that had the footprint on them dropped, and the sales of the products that didn't have the footprint on it increased, because people weren't not buying meat or not buying beef, they were just buying the one that didn't tell them how bad it was, which is why you need it to be universal, in the same way that the traffic light system for calories or whatever it is, for dietary information is, because you need it to be mandated at a universal level so that everyone has the same information. And I think a supermarket did do that in Norway, and they saw that within about 2 months, the average footprint of their shop dropped by about 40%, because they were carbon labelling on the receipts, I think, so that every time you got a receipt, it told you which is sort of a high carbon product or low carbon product. So that's going back to that point earlier around COVID. We can and we have the technology to drive rapid decarbonisation quickly. If we really wanted to, we could probably cut emissions by more than 50% by 2030. And a good example, again, another article I saw that really irritated me over the weekend was in the Financial Times around solar panels. Solar panels have got so cheap that people in the Netherlands were using them as fence panels, because the main cost in installing solar is not the panels, it's in the labour to actually put them on the roof. So, well, if it's cheap enough and you just put it horizontally, or put it vertically, in your garden, so as a fence panel rather than a wood panel, you can still hook it up and it's still going to generate electricity, just not as efficiently as if it's on the roof. So we have the technology to do that, and that we could put solar panels everywhere and generate electricity. The response to that was factories are shutting down and now managing their supply to reinflate the prices of solar panels so that the market is, sort of financially stable. And it's like, well, actually, how do we take that technology, get the government to build a factory and just churn out as many cheap solar panels and just put them on every surface in the UK? Suddenly you've decarbonised it and it's free electricity. And you don't have the issue of the gas crisis, which we've gone through in the past few months, where BP or whoever it was earned 36 billion in 3 months.